You know, I enjoy attending citizenship ceremonies. They're a small window into a world my grandparents would have experienced in the 1950s when they came to Australia, and I can only imagine how grateful they would have been to become naturalised after leaving their communist homeland in Yugoslavia, and how happy they were to pledge allegiance to the Australian flag. And recently I attended a ceremony here in Adelaide, and I was struck by the number of non-Australian flags on show. In addition to the Australian flag being on display, there was also the Aboriginal flag and the Torres Strait Islander flag as well. In addition to this, every new citizen and their families had 3 flags on their chairs: the Australian flag, the Aboriginal flag and the Torres Strait Islander flag. Now, I might be mistaken, but the country these new citizens were joining is Australia, and the Torres Strait is 4,000 kilometres north of Adelaide. So why were they getting anything other than the Australian flag? Because the Australian flag represents our shared history, our shared values as a nation, and all that we collectively hope to hand on to the next generation. During a recent visit to the US, when I was advocating for Julian Assange, I was struck by the fact that most places I visited displayed the American flag without embarrassment, and it was usually the only flag to be seen. One sees their state flags flying from time to time, but there's a broad acceptance of the Stars and Stripes as the flag of the United States. I wonder why. Australia is a nation comprised of people from all walks of life, people of many different cultural and ethnic backgrounds, religious and philosophical beliefs and life experiences. Whether ones of Indigenous descent or Japanese or British or Irish or Italian or Serbian heritage like my family, the flag encapsulates all of our unique histories as people whose families ventured here from far away or who've lived here for a long, long time. It signifies that although there are many variations within the Australian community, we can all celebrate the blessings of being Australian and calling this country home. But these days, there seems to be a sense of embarrassment about our flag, a kind of cultural self-loathing that manifests from time to time. It bothers me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, and particularly when I see members of our political class, our local councils, all the way through to the highest officers of Parliament who feel the need to fly a range of flags rather than just one. And there's a certain reluctance to accept that one flag, at least in political settings, should be able to represent all of us. Many councils now fly various pride flags, which themselves need to be updated all the time for not being inclusive enough with the latest identity group. And these flags apparently signal the importance of drawing attention to the sexual preferences of a relatively small cultural and political interest group. Though I must say, it seems to happen more in Melbourne and Sydney than here in Adelaide or out in the country. You may have heard about a Green-leaning Melbourne council that recently elected to see 20 minority flags, including 9 different pride flags flying throughout the year at various times. And they actually will remove the Australian flag on Australia Day and National Sorry Day, April 15, to mark the anniversary of Indigenous deaths in custody report. Now, some of the flags that will be hoisted will include the aromantic flag to acknowledge those who apparently feel no romantic attraction, the intersex flag, the intersex inclusive pride flag, because the standard pride and trans flag is not inclusive enough at this point, the lesbian pride flag, and perhaps even the worst of all, the Collingwood Football Club flag. Now, this is obviously ridiculous, and it's a good example of what we can expect from progressive city councils, and in this case one I suspect is having a laugh. But the backlash to it made me think many Australians actually want things to return to some semblance of normal, and we want government bodies to focus on things that actually matter. Why exactly is it that aromantic people or intersex people or even Collingwood supporters are not covered by the Australian flag? Well, maybe not that last one, but still, if the Yarra Council wants this, then power to them. They can enjoy being the most diverse and the most inclusive council in the land. When it comes to the Indigenous flag, of course it's important to acknowledge that the flag is meaningful to Indigenous Australians, and that sense of community ought to be respected in a similar way than we would for someone of Irish descent, and the fact that they may find their Irish flag meaningful as it signifies their ancestry from before their lineage in Australia began. However, it'd be strange if we started flying the Irish flag everywhere all the time to signify that we value the Irish Australian community, or started constantly acknowledging that the Irish Australians had a difficult experience in their early days. Because too often, the respects paid to our Indigenous people, whether it's flying the Indigenous flag or airlines referring to places by their traditional names, is just pointless, empty virtue signalling, an exercise in box ticking. And these gestures have often become divisive, condescending, and cause people to feel concerned about whether they're still allowed to enjoy being Australian. Like the country they grew up in is slipping away, and it begs the question of why one flag can't represent us all. Well, the standard progressive response to that question is that Indigenous people continue to suffer dispossession and poverty due to the evil of colonisation, which of course the Australian flag to them represents. The Australian flag becomes something to be regarded with suspicion and scepticism. This perspective assumes that colonisation has brought nothing but harm to Indigenous people and insinuates that those who value the flag are themselves oppressors or at least insensitive to Indigenous suffering. Both of those claims are untrue, and Australians have every right to celebrate the flag. The distorted view which I just described, which seems to treat Indigenous Australians as belonging to a separate nation, as the term First Nation actually implies, found its peak expression in Labor's Voice to Parliament referendum, which Australians overwhelmingly rejected. The Voice referendum wasn't just the defeat of a poorly explained proposal which made no sense, although it certainly was that. It was also the defeat of a victimhood narrative that's pervaded our cultural and political discourse for some time. Things are shifting. Most Australians are tired of the moralising from those who clearly have something to gain from the narrative, and we seem to have gone backwards in recent years regarding some of these issues rather than forwards. The left's obsession with identity politics has generated an absurd number of supposed identity groups and a hyper-focus on what makes us different rather than what we actually have in common. My hope is that one day we'll be able to look at our flag with a sense of gratitude again. Gratitude for our heritage, our freedoms, and the land we share, while acknowledging the unique perspectives that we all bring to the table. Because the Australian flag represents us all, and the Australian flag is the only flag we should be flying in political meetings.